Nope was a test for Jordan Peele. If it's good, then Get Out wasn't a fluke. Us was merely a sophomoric slump, a slump still with its own sect of fans, and it turns out he really is one of the best auteurs working today. If it's bad, then Get Out increasingly seems like him merely catching lightning in a bottle. He slowly starts to look more and more like a Shyamalan character, unable to recapture his initial success, and really is much less impressive than initially thought. Unfortunately for me, Nope firmly falls into the latter category. It's not as disappointing as Tenet or Mank. I didn't personally dislike it as much as Dune, but it is without doubt one of the least competent films I've seen in the past few years, and firm proof that the quality of Get Out was not the rule of his work, but the exception. Nope follows OJ and Emerald Haywood as they look to take advantage of a UFO lurking on their property, and none of this matters because saying anything more about the plot would mean spoiling the experience. So if you want to watch the movie, don't watch this video yet because it is a spoiler review. So with that being said, we might as well just start at the beginning of Nope, which reveals its first flaw. What I dislike about Peele's style of horror in the last few films is that he starts off his movies in the most cryptic ways possible. He purposely puts the most disturbing, confusing images first, no matter their relation to the plot. While not as obviously cheap as something like a jump scare, there is something that feels really unearned about putting these images in early on to capitalize on them later. Peele never feels like he's solving a complicated puzzle box. He's putting in questions with really easy solutions early on, but because we have no context, they seem really fascinating. Almost every provocative moment has a feeling rendered cheap by the easy route of using these images at the beginning section. Do they look good? Certainly. Hoyt van Hoytema's cinematography is of unquestionable high quality, but that and the main twist of this film are really the only aspects I can praise. Before the movie goes full-on horror, this is a brother and sister story, one constantly interrupted and lacking in moving dialogue, but a story nonetheless. It's a shame that their relationship boils down to one recluse sibling and one brashly outgoing one naturally conflicting with each other because of their philosophies on life, because this could have been one of the most interesting relations yet in a Jordan Peele film. There's tons of nuance that you can have between a brother and sister, but ultimately their simple characterizations, embarrassingly simple characterizations, really render their effectiveness in the film totally worthless. The simplicity of that dynamic for me easily makes this the weakest story out of all Peele's work. It lacks all of the nuance, the realness of the relationship of Get Out and the family of Us. We're dealing with less characters than his other movies here, and somehow they are less developed. Angel is a mere placeholder, and the director looking for the perfect shot is a cliche that could not have had a more predictable end. And then we also have Steven Yeun's character, a confusing addition, especially in the context of how his story is told. The use of the flashback to me was borderline infuriating. The way Peele uses the flashback scenes always feels like an intrusion on the main plot. It's not him slowly peeling away at a storyline, it's him chopping up the A-plot to make for one that becomes expendable halfway through the movie. And to include that, just to say that there are some animals we cannot tame, some things not meant to be exploited, that's it? Peele defenders will come up with endless excuses to the depths of the film, but the core ideas of being unable to overcome nature for our own entertainment and our own obsession with spectacle were hardly revolutionary and quite tame in comparison to the themes of his previous movies. Speaking of his previous movies, something Peele did really well was implementing comedy into his horror. Nope's trailers may suggest a typically punchy affair from him, but the comedy overall is so sparse that it feels completely unwarranted when it is present, as if Peele was trying to maintain a standard, a perception of his films that simply was not meant to flow with this story. It becomes even more of a tonal mess come the climax. Not only does this motley crew of individuals start constructing an Ocean's 11 type plan to defeat the creature, but they do so with little to no hesitation and certainly no moment of clarity when they overcome their fear of the monster itself. Nope turns itself into an action movie, harkening back to Raiders of the Lost Ark of all things in its final moments as OJ triumphantly rides from the UFO with swooning music as the wind behind his back. The finale reveals even more of Peele's sloppy execution as he then starts to implement Western music and framing, even though virtually none of the film shares elements to that genre except the extensive use of horseback. It's shocking that such gross tonal inconsistency is competing with the general idiocy of the structure for the worst part of this movie. What I dislike most about Nope is that its story feels like it's borderline exploiting the director's popularity in order to tell a narrative that no one else would be interested in seeing otherwise. And while it's personally disappointing to me that this is not a mainstream blockbuster horror picture, I also don't feel that it as an art house movie, because it most certainly is, as confidently attacks its more obscure elements as other elevated horror pictures. Nope is new, but any of its quote-unquote freshness or quote-unquote innovation falls by the wayside when you realize how downright messy and boring its story is. What will always define Nope for me is that its fake out narrative is the better narrative. The audience was never more invested than they were when the alien creatures came out and acted as an up close and personal threat to our protagonist. Going with those expectations may have made Nope predictable, a retread of old ideas, but the excitement in the first encounter movie that could have been mixed with the government conspiracy elements was ultimately the plot that myself, all my friends, and the entire theater wanted to see. And that, more than anything else, is the tragedy of Nope, that underlying, there is such a good, obvious story there. It's that Jordan Peele refused to take that route. And what it makes me somewhat bitter about this is that he's becoming the new Tarantino, he's becoming the person that just off of namesake we are going to see his movies. And while Us, I thought, was good, but ultimately really poorly done in some ways, this feels like a total blunder that acts as an unfulfilling film to establish Jordan Peele's quality. Because if anything, for me, it establishes more than anything else that he is a one-scene pony. He can do one thing really well, and he occasionally can put out something that feels masterful, but on the whole, he can't quite string everything together like he did in Get Out, which is why I am giving Nope a 2 out of 5.